Hello and welcome to Two and a Half Beards. Today's video is going to be a short one, but I'm going to report on something that is somewhat of a rare occurrence in my life right now, which is playing gigs. Although I play the piano quite a bit, or have in the past, I don't often currently go out and play it for other people for money in a space other than my own home, which is what's required for it to be a gig. Not the money part, but in any case, I played a gig last week, and it was a jazz gig. I was playing jazz piano for only about an hour, um, and it was well received. People liked it. I did a good job, and when I went home, I was thinking about how it went, and I was congratulating myself that I didn't get as nervous as last time, or that I didn't, I knew more tunes and that sort of thing. All the little things I work on, and then I thought, well, I only wish I had made fewer mistakes, because I remember making about 20 mistakes. And then I stopped and stepped back for a minute and thought about what does that actually mean that I made 20 mistakes. I totally recast it suddenly. I had a moment of parallax. So here's what I did. Let's assume that of the hour gig, I was playing for 55 minutes. And of those 55 minutes, or I should say within each of those minutes, I was playing on average 3 notes per second. So for 55 minutes, 3 notes per second, we're talking about 9,900 notes. And then when I went home, I remembered that I had made about 20 mistakes. So let's assume, conservatively here, and I feel like I'm doing myself somewhat of a disservice, but we'll do it anyway to be conservative, because that's the best way to estimate things. Let's assume that each mistake had about 4 wrong notes. So 80 wrong notes. And I wondered, what is the percentage that's represented here? So if we divide 9,820, which is our right number of notes, by 9,900, the total number of notes, we get 99.2%. My error rate was 0.8%. Now, of course, there could have been rhythmic mistakes, there could have been harmonic mistakes, whatever. But thinking just about those note mistakes, my very first habit was to get down on myself and say, I wish I hadn't made those mistakes. I wish I hadn't made so many mistakes. I'm disappointed. Yeah, it went fine, but I made mistakes. And yet, when we turn it around, the proportion of the mistakes to the notes that were right is not even 1%. And this is a problem that I've heard talked about by other musicians. Not as often as really we should be talking about it. Not as often as musicians should be talking about it. Not as often as performers in general should be talking about it. And certainly not as often as what we might say artistic lay people should be talking about it. And the reason it's so important is because our mistakes stick out to us because they were wrong, and it's so easy for us to forget all the things that went right. Now, part of this is evolutionary. It's more valuable in terms of your survival to remember bad things, or in other words, thinking evolutionarily, anthropologically, things that could kill you. The time I almost stepped on a snake, the time the tree branch broke and I fell and broke most of my ribs, but thankfully didn't die. The time that I almost walked off the edge of the cliff. Those are much more useful things to remember than the time that we found berries for the 3rd day in a row. The time that I went to the well and got water where I know there's water. The time that we baked bread and it turned into bread. So we're at a point, though, or I should say, partially we're at a point in our history, and partially also just for ourselves in our daily lives, where we don't need so many of those, we don't need those negative things to overpower the positive ones as much. Most of us survive. Most of us live in fairly good health. We could have a whole other conversation. I'm not saying that evolution is dead, because it certainly is not, but the things we select for are different. In any case, going a little far afield there. Let's bring it back. Our habit is to think only of the negative things and forget the positive things. But when we think about the positive things, I suspect that if you do this in your life, you will find that the number of positive things associated with any activity or thought that you have that is initially negative will so far outweigh the negative elements as to be absurd, as it certainly was in my case. Now, I still want to get better. I still want to practice the piano. I still want to remember those mistakes that I made and use them to address elements of my technique and my performance that I can improve for next time. But after crunching all the numbers, I've decided that I'm not going to beat myself up about it, because dang, if I was getting a degree based on that performance, summa cum laude, right? Pretty good. In fact, that's far above what an A or an A plus is in many classes. It tends to be about 95%. Perhaps for your university it's different. But I digress. We are right much more often than we are wrong. So let's do our best to remember, because gosh, it makes you so happy. See you next week.